don't shy away from doing things that are new and different. Try things out. Two is don't be a cynic because obviously there are a lot of things that are wrong and societies. If you read history and actually be a good student of history, I know that conventionally we've not been taught history well in our schools and therefore many of us don't like it. But whether you use Netflix to watch history or otherwise, develop that sense of history and learn from it, because I think history teaches you that human society has always been problematic, but it has slowly become better. So don't be a cynic and try to be more constructive in your engagement, but also try to be more practical and realistic instead of being idealistic, because being idealistic actually often sets you up a lot. While it does drive your passion, it often sets you up for disappointment.
Welcome, sir. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you.
So, how's the lockdown been going for you?
It's been actually quite hectic. I think, as with most organizations, you have to suddenly pivot to figure out how to sort of continue what you were doing in the normal world and how do you do it during COVID times. So it's been hectic that way, but it's also been, but I think we've sort of figured it out by now how to sort of go manage with the pandemic.
Right. So, sir, I usually start the podcast with this question, which is asking the guest about their childhood aspirations and their school life. So, can you tell the
Right.
listeners about yours?
So in terms of my childhood, so I grew up in Chandigarh, and I did my entire schooling there. I was raised by a single mother, and I think growing up, my core interest was in the sciences,
Okay.
and I was very passionate about science, maths, physics, chemistry, and so I gave the JEE and I got into IIT Bombay. And at that time, I think I had no clue that civic engagement or public policy is something that I'll end up pursuing in my life. But I think this is also something that happens usually when you come from in an Indian context, when you come from a middle class background in a smaller town, that your aspirations are somewhat limited or, by your social context.
Right.
And growing up as raised by a single mother and of a middle class family, I think sciences was the only uh, available option, so to speak. It's only later that when you try to explore more or when you sort of established yourself that you experiment, that I think you end up discovering what you really want to do.
Right. So, how did you figure out your way, like from sciences to public policy?
Yes, so I think the transition happened at IIT Bombay. So while I was at IIT, and of course, I was surrounded by really smart people. But one thing that we also ended up noticing in IIT is that a lot of people in IIT get in because they think they want to make a career in, engineering and sciences. But it's only after they get into this truly start exploring the world out there. So a lot of my batchmates today, some of them are stand-up comedians, some of them are entrepreneurs, some of them are movie makers, and people have completely diversified. So for me also in IIT, I experimented a lot with student body positions. So I contested elections at the hostel level, and then I contested elections at this full campus level. And I actually held four positions through my time in IIT, and towards the end, I was one of the student body representatives for the whole campus. I think that was the transition for me in some sense, in the sense that through that exposure, I realized the importance of running an institution and sort of deciding what kind of policies shape what it becomes. And I think from there, I was also exposed to group of rural activities and a bunch of other things that people used to do on campus, and that sort of cemented my interest in public policies. And so, even though while I was graduating from IIT, I ended up joining the Boston Consulting Group, which is a consulting firm. But I think at the back of my mind, at somewhere, I always had this interest. So I continued exploring. I reached out to a bunch of people to find out, what does one do in things like public policy? How does it work? And then, one thing led to another, and before I knew it, the transition had been made.
So, what would be your suggestion to someone who's figuring out their way, um, like they're starting to know about public policies and want to like you eventually figured out your way? What would be your suggestion to them?
My suggestion would be to experiment actually. I would say that especially in the initial parts of your career, when one of the problems with the Indian education system is it is extremely siloed. There is a tendency to push people into certain fields early on in their careers without allowing people enough opportunity to explore everything else that is out there, right? So, for instance, when I was studying in the US, one of the recurring themes that I used to hear from friends who studied abroad was that, in the US, for instance, specialization doesn't happen at the underground level at all. So no matter what you're trying to sort of get, what career you want to build later on in the US, you are exposed to literature, sciences, humanities, everything in your undergrad. And I think that helps you really establish what you want to do. Unfortunately, that is not the case in India. In fact, in India, even if you choose engineering, you are forced to choose which engineering while you're trying to get into a campus of your choice. And yeah, I mean, as a 18-year-old, there is I can't imagine people really understanding the difference between civil and chemical and electronics and all of that. So I think one of the things that people should do is that not be afraid to experiment, because it's only when you experiment and get yourself exposed to different ideas do you really discover your true passion.
Right. And I think also something which contributes to this is the lack of career counseling and guidance.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. There is a very limited. I mean, there are these stereotypical paths that are put in place, and you're basically in your 10th or 12th, you're asked to choose between one of them, and there is very little scope to maneuver
Right.
in some sense. Yeah.
So, where did you study public policy from, and what were the steps ahead of as you figured out your way, and what were the steps you took?
Right. So I formally studied public policy much later in my career.
Okay.
So the good thing about public policy as a field is that it's very interdisciplinary. So in the sense that, there is room for people with an analytical background. So, even the sciences have a place. There is obviously room for humanities, there's room for economics, law, and everything. So after I completed my 2 year stint at the Boston Consulting Group, I was actively looking for avenues to work in public policy. And I started speaking to a lot of people, trying to find out how one could do that. One thing led me to another, and then eventually somebody pointed me to this organization in Delhi called the PRS Legislative Research, which actually provides support to sitting members of parliament on legislation that is being debated or other policy proposals that are being considered. Now, within their team, they themselves were started by engineers, and within their team, they had a bunch of different kinds of people from different backgrounds. So I, ended up calling them and asking them that, hey, I want to sort of look at a field like this. But before I pursue a higher education, I also want to understand whether I'm good at it, and two, whether this will be of interest. What I can guarantee you, though, is that I'm analytically very solid. So if there is something that I could do with you, then that would be like great exposure. And it worked, and I started working with them. And while I was there, I started experimenting with different policy options. And before I knew it, I became very comfortable and an integral part of the team. And then after that, I decided to work with Mr. Panda, who's a member of parliament. And it's only after that I actually went and pursued my master's
Okay.
from Harvard Kennedy School. But the important point is because public policy is a very interdisciplinary field, there is need for perspectives from all sides. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a degree that gets you started in that area.
Right. So, sir, before we come to talking about your experience with Mr. Panda, can you tell the listeners about Young Leaders for Active Citizenship and the aim and your vision behind it?
Yes. So Young Leaders for Active Citizenship, that is YLAC, is the organization that I started with my co-founder Prajakta after I came back from the Kennedy School in 2016. And the idea of that organization was and is actually to increase citizen engagement in democracy. So while I was working at Mr. Panda's office, who was at that time a member of parliament in the Lok Sabha from Odisha, he was a member of the opposition. We started conducting a lot of these workshops in different parts of the country to understand how youth perceive certain policy matters and how they can be more engaged with it. And otherwise, also during the course of my own work and Prajata's work, she was also working with an MP earlier. We had realized that there are a lot of young people who are very interested in public policy governance, they want to use those channels to make their government more accountable and to sort of create better societies. But there is a lot of apprehension about engaging with the policy making system. One, because people tend to believe that it is extremely corrupt, and there is no good that will come out of the system. And two, because there are no structured mechanisms to do it, right? And in the sense that you're not, let's say, there is a policy issue that you care about, you don't really know how to go about talking to people or legislators to try to get them to listen to you, right? And so that these are sort of, these kind of become important constraints in how people engage. And also, to people's mind, citizenship is about dharnas. To many people's mind, it's about coming out on the road and doing these protests, and not the advocacy that goes on in piece by piece basis on a regular basis. So what we thought is important is that while in India now there is a lot of emphasis on building the capacity of members of parliament or governments, and providing them better support, there is not enough that is trying to get the citizen more engaged, and helping the citizen sort of push the system to do better. And that was essentially the genesis of WILAC. What we wanted to do is to, one, make citizenship cool, make it important, and get people to understand the value and importance of engaging with the system, and also not be as cynical about it, but get more constructive. Because one of the things that we realized in our engagement is that when you engage closely with MPs, etc., you realize that not all of them are bad people. In fact, many of them are really trying to do good work. It is just that it is a difficult construct. You are a country of 1 billion people. There are so many problems to be solved, and it's not easy. So while criticism is easy, constructive engagement is harder, and recognizing that is important. So that was the genesis of WILAC. We started in 2016 with the objective of first working with high school kids to get them, to kind of catch them young, and to get them sensitized to this sooner. And then later on, we expanded and we started working with young professionals, where we trained them in public policy and a bunch of other programs to try to get the citizen to be more engaged.
Okay, so what is the mechanism? How do you guide them? How do you tell them about the subject?
So there are different things that we do. It's not prescriptive at all. What we try to do is we run different kinds of interventions. So for instance, we run several programs, firstly, wherein people work on live problems that they care about. What that does is that gives them an exposure into a real policy issue or a problem, and tries to get them to do something about it. And through it, often people end up realizing sometimes how hard it is, and they also end up realizing what all the government is trying to do in that construct. So for instance, one of the programs, as I said, we run the Policy in Action program, which is basically training on public policy. There, young professionals work on live projects for sitting members of parliament. And through those research projects, the idea is that they get to support the member of parliament in their work while also learning about the issue. And that ends up giving them a lot of exposure. Similarly, with high school students, we have programs on research, advocacy. So for instance, we have a summer program called the High School Achievers Program, which tries to sensitize young high schoolers about their privilege, about notions of justice in society, how the government works, how they can campaign about things that they care about. We also run a fellowship with Instagram called the Counter Speech Fellowship, which uses art as a medium of advocacy. And the idea is to get young people to work on issues they care about. So for instance, stuff like bullying, mental well-being, diversity, gender, and advocate for those issues, and in the process try to make a better society. Similarly, we have, we create lesson plans for civics NCERT textbooks that teachers can use to teach civics in a fun way in school. So, I don't know about you, but I was taught civics in a very, very boring way, to the extent that I had started to hate it. So I think our idea was to sort of change that. So a bunch of different kinds of interventions, and hoping that we build this next cadre of young people who are cognizant of the power of government and engage with it constructively.
Right. So, what kind of impact have you been able to create, and what are the kind of testimonials, like the students who've been engaged in the program, they come and tell you what change have you made?
Yes. So I think I have to be a little modest about it in this sense that any change in this kind of a space takes time, because the idea is that you are trying to kindle minds and that will take their own time to sort of nurture and become entities in their own respect. An example is me and Aprajita as examples. Somebody exposed us to public policy, and several years later, we've sort of doing all of this. We've sort of become champions for it ourselves. Similarly, WILAC has engaged several young people over the course of its past 4 years and exposed them to different ideas. And none of our programs are prescriptive in the sense that we sort of are very conscious to not tell people that a good citizen means this,
Right.
or that you should do this, otherwise you're not a good citizen. That's not how we work. Our idea is to expose people to reality, build their empathy, and let it take its own course. So over the course of the years, different people that we've graduated. So for instance, for young professionals, many have actually shifted into the space of public policy. There are people who are now graduates of WILAC who are working with members of parliament, who are working with state governments, who are working on advocacy campaigns, who are working with political parties. With high schoolers, many have gotten exposure to humanities and are also running their own campaigns. So for instance, there's one of our students who's been running a campaign called Mardangi, and basically to break down notions around toxic masculinity. There are others who have joined different, who are supporting different think tanks in different ways. And more importantly, many of them have become more cognizant of the way society works and their own privilege. And the fact that they need to recognize their own privilege and use it for good. So in terms of testimonials, we often hear from parents coming back and telling us that I don't know what you did to my kid in a month. The kid suddenly seems to be a lot more mature. And this is for high school kids. And the fact that they are talking about things that they hadn't spoken about before. With young professionals, of course, it's a completely different exposure. And many of them who, like me, were in traditional work streams because society forced them into those work streams, have sort of discovered their passion and are switching tracks. And the idea is that over a period of time, you'll end up creating this cadre of well-informed, passionate individuals who will come and run campaigns and try to change society for the better. One last example I would like to give is that currently during COVID, 150 of our alumni and volunteers had come together to run this campaign called Corona Campaign. And that is Karo Na campaign around things related to COVID. For instance, don't spread hate speech. They had been running fundraisers for migrant workers. And they had been trying to create content for gender. Like, for instance, one of the things that happened in COVID is that women have been disproportionately burdened at home. Right. So now that everyone is at home, women have to cook also, they have to look at their office also. Their laptop is also taken away when their kid has to sit in front of the classroom. So their idea of sensitizing families to these gender constructs during this time. So all of these campaigns have been run by our fellows and students who graduated through WILAC over several years. Yeah.
So, sir, my next question for you is, like you told the listeners, you worked with Mr. Panda and in his office. So, what are the flaws that you see in the policy making mechanism or the structure that you would like to point out?
Right. I think one of the fundamental problems in the Indian policy making system is the lack of space for the opposition. And all the things that you see end up seeing in parliament or otherwise, where parliament tends to get adjourned every now and then, or there's not enough discussion happening. In fact, there's a lot of shouting happening in the well of the house, are essentially stemming from this main issue. The fact that the opposition doesn't often have a structured platform to ask the government tough questions. So whenever the opposition wants to ask the government tough questions, the government often refuses, and then it leads to a pandemonium and the parliament is adjourned. That really doesn't help anyone. If you look at mature democracies like the UK, US, there the opposition gets a lot more time to decide the agenda of the House. For instance, if I remember correctly, in UK, the opposition gets about 20 days where it solely decides what it wants to ask the government. And the government has no say in allowing it or not allowing it. In the Indian context, an MP who's from the opposition actually feels very powerless. While as citizens, we might have a lot of aspirations from our MPs if they are in the opposition. And in fact, even if they are not ministers but a part of the ruling party, even then they are quite helpless. So that I think is a fundamental issue that needs fixing, and is something that citizens should actually push for in terms of reform of the parliamentary system that we sort of have.
So one instance I remember was our teacher teaching us about the question hour, and
Right.
very to my surprise, the example she gave us was very funny. She said, "जहाँ पे you must have seen TV में कि जहाँ पे एक दूसरे के ऊपर सब लोग चिल्ला रहे होते हैं." So that is one instance I remember. And so the idea of questionnaire and the idea of opposition is um, very disturbed in our minds. We do not really know what the role of opposition actually is.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we tend to criticize the opposition. So sometimes one of the things you would commonly hear in household conversations is that, let's say the BJP is saying something now, they would say that Congress is going to oppose them just because it is in the opposition, but if
Right.
Congress were in power, it would do the same. That is not really a problem because the opposition's goal is to point out flaws, and as a citizen, it helps you be better informed. Whether you agree with them or disagree with them, that's fine, right? So the point is that you need a very structured platform where debates can happen, where opposition can point out flaws in the whatever the government is proposing, so that the overall policy can become better. While at Mr. Panda's office, I think all of us in his team sometimes used to feel constrained by the fact that even though we have very good ideas, and there are reforms we want to push, the fact that he was a member of the opposition, he himself and by virtue of that, the team felt constrained by how much he could do. And there's a little bit of helplessness, I think, that sets in across all offices. You would not assume there to be helplessness in offices of members of parliament, but unfortunately, given the way the system is structured, power is very concentrated, and that I think causes a lot of problems.
So, sir, like in the current situation, now that we're in a state of health crisis or crisis, I would say. So now we're realizing how important the healthcare at the base level or the village level is. For example, the ashas in the Anganwadi centers. So, what according to you are the key factors to build a strong healthcare system in a country?
Right. So one, before I answer that question, I would just like to say that I'm not really a healthcare expert, but having worked in public policy for very long, and we also run a firm called the Quantum Hub, which is a sister concern of WILAC, where we do public policy research and advocacy. And between WILAC and TQH, we look at three things: that is policy research, advocacy, and citizen engagement. That's the trio that sort of comes together. Now, having said that, I think firstly, healthcare in general is a difficult problem to solve because of the amount of discretion that is involved, in the sense that your doctor at the local level or your Yasha worker at the local level has to take a decision, which means that all of them have to be equally qualified, which also means that you have to produce enough professionals that can be qualified. And then, of course, you need all that infrastructure. So I think there is frankly no quick fix to any of this. I think systematically, maybe we have been spending lesser on, our healthcare infrastructure for a very long period of time. We Our public infrastructure and public healthcare system, in fact, is much poorer than our private healthcare system in several ways. And I think there needs to be a systemic effort to build it up from the bottom. And also changes in the way we regulate. For instance, the way doctors are regulated and licensed in India, there is a lot of corruption there. There is a lot of asymmetry of information there. And, the way, for instance, until recently, of course, just getting a degree from a college would entitle you to become a doctor, unlike, say, in the US, where you have an exit exam, which qualifies you to be a doctor. So there are a lot of host of these regulatory changes, infrastructure changes that need to be undertaken, but that's not something I think, unfortunately, that you can solve in the short term, and that will need sustained effort over several years.
So, sir, like you spoke about the quantum hub. So, can you elaborate what I would say what obstacles did you face while you were setting it up while the project was in a very initial stage?
I wouldn't say hurdles per se. I think we were also trying to discover the space. One of the things we had realized is that all of people who are all passionate individuals and educated Indians essentially want that policy should be evidence based, right? And we somehow at some level believe, a lot of people at some level believe, that the government sometimes doesn't look at all evidence before it makes policy. Firstly, one, that is not necessarily true. Secondly, it's the people who have suggestions have to, understand how to present that evidence and to advocate for it. So one of the gaps that we were noticing, Prajita and I had noticed during our work, in the policy space is that there is often a disconnect between what the academia, what the civil society, what the businesses are wanting and trying to say, and what the government does. Partly because some of the work that the academia does is not exactly in sync with what the government is planning, or the timelines are very different. And academic research would take several years. Similarly, the work that grassroots organizations do and the solutions they are trying to propose are sometimes not completely aligned with all policy constraints. So what was really needed, and we felt there was a gap in the system, is that an organization who is academically strong, understands how things work on the ground, and is able to bring it together into structured conversations for advocacy. That somebody who can bring together the evidence and do advocacy properly to build a narrative around the new policy solution, and then try to get the government to implement it. So that was a notion with which we started, and it does turn out that there is this gap, and the Quantum Hub is, doing very well in trying to fill that gap. For instance, we've been working on projects around gender empowerment, where we've looked at there is an organization called iWage, which basically works on women economic empowerment. Now they have a bunch of studies being done in the field in different states. So we try to sort of synthesize all of that evidence. And now we are entering into a phase where we are trying to figure out how to take that evidence to government to try and get the government to change the policies and make them more effective. So those are the kind of gaps we've been trying to fill. While there was no challenge per se in getting it off the ground, I think it's taken us a while to build a reputation as somebody who understands this and can do this well.
So another topic, or I would say very upcoming thing that we've been hearing of, is the boycott of the Chinese goods, the movement that we've been reading and following up on social media. So while we do see the post, we do not realize the consequences that would be attached to it. So for say there's a fall in the demand for the Chinese good, what effect would you say would that cause on the MSME sector or the employment rate?
Right. So I think citizens are obviously going by, I mean, it's a way of channelizing the anger towards the apparent breach of trust. Obviously people do it in different ways. But I think we need to be just cognizant of the fact that supply chains are not suddenly replaced.
Absolutely.
Right. So you've been trying to, let's say you want to boycott certain Chinese products, but if Chinese products have penetrated your supply chains in different ways, and let's say there is an MSME that is procuring raw material from a Chinese firm, it's going to be very hard to substitute it suddenly. Right. And it's going to be very hard to find a vendor at a comparable rate in India suddenly, and that too in the middle of a lockdown. And that could affect the production of several goods. And so while the move is well intentioned, it could have damaging effects. What might be better beneficial, as the Prime Minister also said, is that over a period of time you build your self-reliance, and you get more people to domestically produce things that you want. But I don't think it is something that can be done right away, and that might actually end up causing a lot more disruption in the economy than what we would like, and especially at a time of COVID, where there is already a lot of disruption that has entered in the economy.
So what would you say are the key factors to keep in mind while we look forward and to build a very strong domestic production chain?
So I think, again, this is something that people have been saying for a very long period of time. I think it is important to realize that, again, domestic production cannot suddenly be increased. India actually suffers from a lot of issues, which are the reason why it is not being able to compete with China. In fact, I'll actually give you an example of something that my professor at the Harvard Kennedy School had once said, and he was talking to us about. So this was a professor who had spent a considerable amount of time in India, and was trying to explain to us that why is it that the tech sector seems to flourish in India, but with respect to other manufacturing sector, we are not able to export it. And he said, I remember once, being in Chennai, and I don't know where he was coming from, but he said that in Chennai at that one point in time, there was one big highway that was connecting the city to the port. And due to some construction, half of that highway was shut off. And there was no other way to go to the port. And he said all of the material and goods that was to be exported was actually getting clogged because of that one highway being under repair. And he said, this is the problem in India, right? One of the problems is our infrastructure is so poor that even if you were to produce something, it is not possible easily to export it because of logistics issues. And so he jokingly said that that is the only reason why the tech sector works really well in India, because you have to zoom in and zoom out digitally through satellite, those packets, and you don't have to physically move them. If you were to travel to China, actually, you realize that their infrastructure is phenomenal. Their roads are phenomenal, which really facilitates easy production export. It also reduces costs for companies who are producing and trying to export. Now, unless India fixes all of those problems, apart from fixing all the ease of doing business and how long it takes to get a license, etc., these are fundamental issues that affect your export capability and your capability to produce at cheap prices. So unless India fixes all of these, it's going to be very hard to compete. And if you were to just replace Chinese products, you also have to realize that domestically, if you start procuring, so why is it that a business takes something from China and not from India? Usually, it is because it is cheaper. If you now ask companies to source everything from India, their final product costs will rise. So that will also lead to inflation. So it's not as simple as sometimes it is projected. I mean, it's going to take a while, and there are a bunch of different kinds of fixes that will need to be brought together to get it going.
Right. So I have these last couple of questions for you. So, which is, what is the best advice that you've ever got, be it on life, be it on your professional side?
Be it on life or professional side. Okay. Um, I can't think of one, but I would say I think the one of the best advices is to not be so stuck up about what the society wants you to do, and on the different metrics that society judges you, but to try and do what you really want to do or what you feel like doing. I think the deal is that if you force yourself to do things you don't enjoy, you're unlikely to be best at them. You ever become best at them. But if you do things that you like and enjoy, whether that is chartered territory, uncharted territory, you're likely to scale, I think, much higher heights. So I think that is one advice. The second small bit of advice that I was given while I got into IIT was one of my professors, and he was a physics teacher who taught me for the JEE exam. So once you get a rank in IIT, you are called for counseling, and you're supposed to indicate which IIT you want to go to. So being in Chandigarh, I had to go to Delhi and sort of list my priority order. My professor had told me that try to go as far away from home as possible at this age, because it will really make you independent. So even though my initial temptation was to list Delhi on my sheet so that I could go back home often, I listed Bombay, and I went to IIT Bombay. And then I used to come back home only twice or thrice a year. And I think that fundamentally changed the way I sort of took responsibility for my own self at that young age. So I think probably these are probably two things that I would say stand out for me.
Right. And now, what would your advice? What would be your advice to the young change makers or the policy makers, or in general, the young students who are just exploring avenues from themselves, exploring domains?
Yeah, so I think one is be experimental.
Right.
Don't shy away from doing things that are new and different. Try things out. Two is don't be a cynic, because obviously there are a lot of things that are wrong, and societies. If you read history and actually be a good student of history, I know that conventionally we've not been taught history well in our schools, and therefore many of us don't like it. But whether you use Netflix to watch history or otherwise, develop that sense of history, and learn from it, because I think history teaches you that human society has always been problematic,
Right.
but it has slowly become better. So don't be a cynic and try to be more constructive in your engagement, but also try to be more practical and realistic instead of being idealistic, because being idealistic actually often sets you up a lot. While it does drive your passion, it often sets you up for disappointment. So I think having that maturity in your perspective is something that will really help no matter what you do.
So, just for the listeners, or the young listeners who listen to the podcast, how can they reach to you, and what are the platforms that you'll be providing to them?
So I think Vilac is very approachable. I mean, if you write to the office email address on the Vilac website, we respond within a couple of hours always. So So I think anyone who is passionate about making a change, if there is anything that they would like us, if there is any ideas they have, they want to sort of want us to sort of work on something, we are open to that. And I would just say that first, more importantly than Lilac, people should just sort of start taking more responsibility for the communities that they live in and try to sort of work with the representatives there, to change them. So if you, for instance, see a road that is broken in front of your house, look up your counselor and go to them and try to sort of nudge them to do better. Because as more people like you start nudging, things will become better. It'll be hard for the counselor to ignore. Right. So I mean, that would be my first advice. For anything else that you need, you can write to us, and we'll be happy to sort of look at it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, sir, for the time and for the great insights that you gave us.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Shreya.